The ship landed on the just as the twin suns began to set. Daniel Cole stood at the viewport and watched the alien city stretch out below him. Tall silver towers reached toward the purple sky. Flying vehicles moved between buildings like streams of light. It was beautiful, but Daniel felt no excitement. He felt only the weight of duty. He was a soldier. He had spent 12 years fighting in the border wars, protecting colonies and watching good people die. Now the war was over and the politicians had found a new use for him. They wanted peace with the empire. They wanted a marriage between species, and they had chosen him to be the groom. Ambassador Hayes met him at the bottom of the ramp. She was a sharp woman with gray hair and tired eyes. She had spent months arranging this alliance. "You understand what you need to do," she said. It was not a question. "I choose one of the Emperor's daughters," Daniel replied. "We get married, our species become friends." "It's more complicated than that, but yes, that's the simple version." She started walking toward a waiting vehicle. "The value strength and beauty above all else. The Emperor has 4 daughters. The eldest 3 are considered the finest examples of their species. You should choose one of them." "And the 4th?" Paused. "The 4th is different. They consider her flawed. She was born with silver scales instead of gold. They see it as a bad sign. No one expects you to choose her. No one would want you to." Daniel said nothing. He climbed into the vehicle and watched the alien city pass by outside the window. The Imperial Palace was the largest building Daniel had ever seen. It rose from the center of the city like a mountain made of crystal and metal. Guards in golden armor stood at every entrance. Servants with scales of every color moved through the halls. Everyone stopped to stare at the human as he passed. Daniel had faced enemy soldiers without fear. He had walked through battlefields covered in smoke and fire. But this place made him uncomfortable. Everything was too clean, too perfect, too designed to impress. They brought him to a massive hall filled with hundreds of nobles. The ceiling was so high he could barely see it. Lights floated in the air like tiny stars. At the far end of the hall sat Emperor on a throne made of black stone. The Emperor was old but powerful. His scales were deep gold and his eyes were sharp. He studied Daniel the way a predator studies prey. "Human," the Emperor said. His voice echoed through the hall. "You come to us seeking alliance through blood. This is our way. You will choose one of my daughters to be your bonded mate. Choose wisely. Your choice will shape the future of both our peoples." Daniel bowed his head in respect. "I am honored, Emperor." The Emperor raised one clawed hand. "Bring forth my daughters." A door opened at the side of the hall. The first princess entered and the crowd made sounds of approval. Her name was. She was tall and graceful, with scales that shone like pure gold. Jewels covered her body. She walked like she owned the universe and everyone in it. She stopped before Daniel and looked at him with cold, calculating eyes. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. The second princess followed. Her name was. She was a warrior with powerful muscles beneath her golden scales. She wore armor instead of jewels. She looked at Daniel like he was a challenge to be defeated. The third princess was named. She was softer than her sisters with an artist's grace. She carried herself with quiet confidence. Of the 3, she seemed the most genuine, but even she looked at Daniel as if measuring his worth. Then came the 4th princess. The crowd went quiet, but not with admiration. Daniel heard whispers of disapproval. Some nobles turned away as if they could not bear to look. Princess was smaller than her sisters. Her scales were not gold but pale silver, like moonlight on water. She wore simple clothes with no jewels. She kept her eyes lowered as she walked, as if she was used to being invisible. She took her place at the end of the line, separate from her sisters. She did not try to impress Daniel. She did not even seem to expect him to notice her. But Daniel noticed. He watched all 4 princesses carefully, kept glancing at him with hunger in her eyes, stood rigid, waiting to see if he was worthy. smiled politely but distantly, looked at nothing. Then, just for a moment, her eyes lifted. She looked at Daniel not with calculation or judgment, but with simple curiosity. She seemed to wonder who he really was. That small moment told Daniel everything he needed to know. The Emperor spoke again. "You have seen my daughter's human, make your choice." The hall fell silent. Every eye was on Daniel. He could feel the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Everyone knew what he was supposed to do. He was supposed to choose the most beautiful, or perhaps the strongest. That was what made sense. That was what would bring the most honor. Daniel began to walk. He passed, her smile froze on her face. He passed, her eyes widened with confusion. He passed, she stepped back in surprise. He stopped in front of. The Silver Princess looked up at him with shock in her eyes. Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She did not understand what was happening. "I choose this one," Daniel said clearly. The hall exploded with noise. Nobles shouted in confusion and anger. The elder princesses stared with disbelief. Emperor rose from his throne, his expression unreadable. Still had not moved. She looked at Daniel as if he had lost his mind. "Why?" she whispered. Her voice was soft and uncertain. Daniel looked into her silver eyes. "Because you were the only one who looked at me like I was a person instead of a prize." The noise in the hall grew louder. Ambassador Hayes covered her face with her hands. The elder princesses demanded to know if this was some kind of insult. But Daniel did not care about any of them. He only cared about the small princess standing before him, looking at him with wonder and fear, and the first tiny spark of hope. He had made his choice. Now everyone would have to live with it. And none of them understood that Daniel Cole never made choices without reason. He had seen something in that no one else had bothered to look for, something real, something worth more than gold. The astonishment in the hall was only the beginning. Daniel knew that the hardest part was still to come. But as he looked at the Silver Princess who had spent her whole life being ignored, he felt something he had not felt in years. He felt like he had finally done something right. The days after the choosing ceremony were strange and difficult. Daniel and were given a private wing of the palace to share while preparations were made for the formal bonding ritual. Servants brought them food and clothing. Guards stood outside their doors, but no one spoke to them with kindness. The court treated the match as a joke. Nobles whispered behind their hands whenever Daniel walked past. They laughed it openly, as if the choosing had somehow made her situation even worse instead of better. She had been ignored before. Now she was a target. Daniel watched all of this with quiet anger. He had seen cruelty in war. He had seen soldiers turn on each other and civilians suffer for no reason. But this was different. This was cruelty dressed up in silk and jewels, hidden behind polite smiles and proper manners. Kept her distance from him at first. They shared the same wing of the palace, but she spent most of her time in her private laboratory. She was a scientist, Daniel learned. She studied the biology of different alien species, trying to understand how they could work together. For the first week, they barely spoke, seemed to be waiting for something. Daniel realized she was waiting for him to admit he had made a mistake. She expected him to go to the Emperor and ask to change his choice. He never did. One evening, Daniel found her sitting alone in the garden courtyard of their wing. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting silver light across the flowers. Scales seemed to glow in the moonlight. "May I sit?" Daniel asked. Looked up at him with guarded eyes. "If you wish." He sat down on the stone bench beside her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the gentle splash of water in a nearby fountain. "You can ask," Daniel said finally. "I know you want to." His hands tightened in her lap. "Why did you choose me? The truth this time. My sisters are everything a male could want. Beautiful, strong, golden. I am none of those things, so why?" Daniel considered his answer carefully. In the war, I learned to watch people. You can tell a lot about someone by how they act when they think no one is looking. Your sisters looked at me like I was something to be won, a trophy, a tool. They did not see me at all. And I was different. You looked at me like you were curious, like you wanted to understand who I was, not what I could give you. Daniel turned to face her. That is rare. In my experience, it is the rarest thing in the universe. Was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I have spent my whole life being told I am worthless. My scales are wrong. My interests are wrong. Everything about me is wrong. I stopped believing I would ever matter to anyone. Then you were wrong too, Daniel said simply. Something changed in his eyes. The walls she had built around herself began to crack, just a little. She did not smile, not yet, but she stopped looking at Daniel like he was a threat. From that night on, they began to talk, really talk, told Daniel about her work in xenobiology. She showed him her research on how different species could cooperate, how their bodies and minds could learn to work together. Her eyes came alive when she spoke about science. Daniel saw intelligence and passion that her people had completely ignored. Daniel told her about the war. He did not hide the ugly parts. He told her about friends he had lost, about choices that still haunted him, about the moment he realized that fighting was not the same as winning. Listened without judgment. She asked questions that showed she truly wanted to understand. Slowly, carefully, they began to build something real between them. It was not love yet. It was something more basic and more important. It was respect. But not everyone was happy about this development. Princess watched her youngest sister with growing hatred. She had expected Daniel to come crawling back within days, begging to change his choice. Instead, rumors were spreading through the court that the human and the silver princess actually seemed to like each other. This was unacceptable. Was the eldest. She was the most beautiful. She had spent her entire life being told she would make the most important marriage in history. Now a human had rejected her for her worthless little sister, and the court was starting to talk. She decided to take matters into her own hands. One afternoon, she found Daniel alone in the palace library. He was reading about history, trying to understand the people he would soon be officially joined with. Human, said, her voice like honey, may I speak with you? Daniel looked up. He saw the golden princess standing before him in a gown that sparkled like stars. Her smile was warm and inviting, but her eyes were cold. Of course, he said carefully. Sat down across from him. She leaned forward, letting her beauty fill his vision. I wanted you to know that I understand. You made your choice to be polite, to avoid offending anyone. It was very clever of you. I am not sure I understand. My sister is broken. Everyone knows this. You cannot possibly want her, but it is not too late. Reached out and placed her hand on Daniel's arm. My father would understand if you changed your mind. I would make a much better mate. I can offer you things never could. Daniel looked at her hand on his arm. Then he looked into her beautiful, empty eyes. No, he said. Smile flickered, no. I made my choice. I will not change it. You would rather have that silver-scaled failure than me. His voice lost its sweetness. Are humans truly so stupid? Daniel stood up. He was not a tall man by standards, but something in his eyes made lean back. Your sister is worth more than you will ever understand, Daniel said quietly. She is kind. She is brilliant. She sees value in others instead of just in herself. You look at me and see a prize. She looks at me and sees a person. That is why I chose her. That is why I will never choose you. He walked out of the library without looking back. Sat alone in the silence. Her hands shook with rage. She had never been rejected before. She had never been told she was less than anyone, especially not her worthless little sister. She would not let this stand. If Daniel Cole would not come to his senses, then she would have to make him, or remove him entirely. That evening, met with a group of nobles who shared her anger. They were traditionalists who believed the human had insulted the empire by choosing the cursed princess. They whispered about what could be done, about how accidents could happen, about how treaties could be broken. In their private wing of the palace, Daniel and sat together and talked about the future. For the first time in her life, allowed herself to hope. She did not know that shadows were gathering around them. She did not know that her own sister was planning something terrible. But Daniel knew. He had felt eyes watching him all day. He had survived too many wars to ignore his instincts. Something was coming, he would be ready. And he would protect with everything he had. The grand diplomatic dinner was held 1 month after the choosing ceremony. Representatives from 12 different species filled the imperial banquet hall. It was meant to celebrate the coming alliance between humans and it was meant to show the galaxy that peace was possible. Daniel wore a formal human military uniform, wore a gown of pale blue that made her silver scales shine like stars. For the first time, she walked into a crowded room with her head held high. Daniel walked beside her, and he felt her hand trembling slightly in his. "You look beautiful," he told her quietly. Smiled, it was a real smile, small but genuine. "You are a strange human, Daniel Cole." "So I have been told." Emperor sat at the head of the longest table. His 3 golden daughters sat nearby, their faces masks of polite displeasure. Watched with eyes full of poison, but she said nothing. She simply waited. The dinner proceeded smoothly. Speeches were made about friendship between species. Toasts were raised to the future. Daniel noticed that was slowly relaxing. She even laughed at something Ambassador Hayes said. It was the first time Daniel had heard her laugh. He wanted to hear that sound every day for the rest of his life. As the evening went on, servants moved through the hall carrying trays of food and drink. Daniel watched them out of habit. In war, you learn to watch everyone, especially the people no one else paid attention to. One servant caught his eye, a young male with dull brown scales. He moved differently than the others. His steps were too careful. His eyes kept darting toward. Daniel's instincts screamed at him. He turned to look at. She was speaking with a diplomat from another world, her face animated with interest. She had no idea anything was wrong. The servant was getting closer. His hand was moving toward something hidden beneath his tray. Daniel did not think, he simply moved. He threw himself in front of just as the assassin pulled out a blade that gleamed with green poison. The blade meant for his heart sank deep into Daniel's shoulder instead. The pain was immediate and terrible. It was not just the wound. The poison spread through his body like liquid fire. Daniel fell to his knees, but his hand shot out and grabbed the assassin's wrist. "Guards!" someone shouted. The hall erupted into chaos. Daniel held onto the assassin even as his vision blurred. He would not let go. He would not let this creature escape to try again. Screamed his name. She dropped to her knees beside him, her hands pressing against his wound, her silver scales now stained with red human blood. "Daniel, Daniel, stay with me." The guard seized the assassin. Daniel finally let go. He looked up at its face and saw tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're crying," he said. His voice was weak. "I didn't know could cry." "Foolish human," sobbed. "Why did you do that? Why?" "Because you matter," Daniel whispered. Then the poison took him and everything went dark. For 3 days, Daniel hovered between life and death. The healers had never treated a human before. The poison was designed to kill their own species. They did not know how it would affect human biology. Refused to leave his side. She worked with the healers day and night, using her scientific knowledge to analyze the poison and develop an antidote. She did not sleep. She barely ate. When the healers told her to rest, she refused. When her sisters sent messages asking her to remember her dignity, she ignored them. Emperor came to visit on the 2nd day. He stood in the doorway and watched his youngest daughter holding the human's hand. whispering to him even though he could not hear her. "You truly care for him," the emperor said. Looked up, her eyes were red from crying and lack of sleep. "He nearly died for me, father. No one has ever thought I was worth protecting before." The emperor was silent for a long moment. Then he said something he had never said to before. "I am sorry, daughter. I am sorry I let you believe you were worthless." It was not enough to heal years of neglect, but it was a start. On the third day, Daniel opened his eyes. The first thing he saw was Face. She was asleep in a chair beside his bed, her hand still holding his. "Hey," Daniel said softly. His eyes flew open. For a moment she just stared at him. Then she threw herself forward and wrapped her arms around him, holding him as if she would never let go. "You stupid, wonderful, impossible human," she said into his shoulder. "Don't you ever do that again." Daniel lifted his weak arms and held her back. "No promises." While Daniel recovered, the investigation into the assassination attempt continued. The assassin refused to speak at first, but interrogators were very skilled. Eventually, the truth came out. The attack had been planned by a faction of nobles who believed the marriage between Daniel and was an insult to the empire. They wanted to kill and blame it on human treachery. This would destroy the alliance and restore what they called proper order. The investigation found evidence that someone in the royal family might be involved. The trail of messages and secret meetings led toward Princess, but she had been careful. There was no direct proof of her involvement. Emperor was forced to confront an uncomfortable truth. His own court was rotting from within. Nobles he had trusted were willing to murder his daughter to preserve their pride. He addressed the court the day after Daniel woke up. His voice was cold with anger. "A human soldier nearly died protecting my daughter. He did not hesitate. He did not think of himself. He saw danger and he acted." The emperor looked at the assembled nobles. "Can any of you say you would have done the same? Can any of you say you have ever treated Princess with such honor?" The hall was silent. "The alliance will proceed," Emperor declared, "and anyone who moves against it again will face my personal judgment." Word spread across the empire and beyond. The story of the human who took a poisoned blade for the forgotten princess traveled from world to world. People who had laughed at the match fell silent. People who had dismissed Daniel as a fool began to reconsider. In her private chambers, Princess raged. She had been so close. If Daniel had been just a little slower, would be dead and the alliance would be destroyed. Instead, the situation was worse than ever. Her youngest sister was now seen as sympathetic. The human was being called a hero, and herself was under suspicion, even if nothing could be proven. She would have to be more careful next time. She would have to find a different way to destroy what Daniel and were building. But there would be a next time, swore it. In the healing wing of the palace, Daniel and sat together. His shoulder was bandaged, and he was still weak from the poison, but he was alive. Held his hand. She had not let go of it since he woke up. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything." Daniel smiled. "I told you you matter. You nearly died for me. And I would do it again." He squeezed her hand. "You are worth dying for, but more than that, you are worth living for. I hope I get the chance to prove that." Leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his. It was a gesture of deep affection. Daniel closed his eyes and felt something warm spread through his chest. For the first time, it was not pain. It was hope. 2 months passed. Daniel's wound healed, though it left a scar on his shoulder. Traced the scar with her fingers sometimes, reminding herself that it was real. That someone had actually been willing to suffer for her. The formal bonding ritual was approaching. In tradition, a simple ceremony was not enough. The bonding required both partners to share their inner selves through ancient technology. Their minds would connect. Their memories would flow between them. Everything they had ever felt, feared, or loved would be laid bare. It was the most sacred ritual in culture. It was also the most dangerous. Many have failed the bonding, explained to Daniel one evening. They were walking through the palace gardens, enjoying the cool night air. If two minds are not compatible, the connection can cause madness or death. That sounds pleasant, Daniel said dryly. I am serious, Daniel. The ritual has never been performed with an alien species. We do not know what will happen when a human mind connects with a mind. Stopped walking and turned to face him. You could refuse. There are other ways to formalize the alliance. You do not have to risk yourself again. Daniel looked into her silver eyes. Over the past months, he had come to know those eyes well. He had seen fear in them, and sadness and loneliness. He had also seen joy, curiosity, and the beginning of something deeper. Do you want to bond with me? He asked. Scales flushed slightly darker. Yes, I do, more than I have ever wanted anything, but not if it costs you your life. Daniel took her hands in his. Then we do it together. The day of the bonding ritual arrived. The ceremony was held in the oldest temple on The building was made of black stone that seemed to absorb light. At its center was a circular chamber where the bonding technology waited. Thousands of watched through viewing screens across the empire. This would be the first bonding between their species and humans. No one knew what to expect. Daniel walked into the temple wearing simple white clothes, walked beside him in the same. They had agreed to face this moment as equals. No titles, no decorations, just themselves. The high priest was an ancient with scales that had faded to almost white. He had performed hundreds of bonding rituals. He looked at Daniel with doubt in his old eyes. Human, the priest said, I must warn you. My people believe your species is emotionally unstable. Your minds are said to be chaotic and undisciplined. The bonding will magnify everything you are. If there is darkness in you, we will all see it. If there is weakness, it will be exposed. Daniel met the priest's gaze without flinching. Then you will see the truth of me. I have nothing to hide. The priest turned too. And you, princess, are you prepared to share yourself with this alien? I am, said. Her voice was steady. The priest nodded slowly. Then let the bonding begin. Daniel and were led to the center of the chamber. They stood facing each other on a platform surrounded by strange crystal formations. Ancient machines hummed to life around them. Blue light began to pulse through the crystals. Clear your minds, the priest instructed. Let the connection form naturally. Do not resist. Daniel looked at, she was trembling slightly. He reached out and took her hands. I trust you, he said. I trust you, she replied. The light grew brighter, the humming grew louder, and then suddenly the connection formed. Daniel felt's mind touch his. It was like nothing he had ever experienced. It was like drowning and breathing at the same time. Memories flooded through him that were not his own. He saw as a child, looking at her golden sisters and wondering why she was different. He felt her loneliness as she grew up ignored and mocked. He experienced her quiet determination to prove her worth through science and study. He saw her crying alone in her room, year after year, believing she would never be loved. And then she saw him. The observers watched through their screens as the crystal formations began to glow brighter than anyone had ever seen. Something was happening, something unprecedented. Entered Daniel's mind and found not chaos but depth. Human emotions were not unstable. They were vast. They were like an ocean, deep and powerful and endlessly complex. She saw Daniel as a boy, growing up in a small town on Earth, dreaming of seeing the stars. She felt his excitement when he joined the military, and his horror when he first saw the reality of war. She experienced the weight of every death he could not prevent, every friend he lost, every nightmare that still haunted his sleep. But she also saw his strength. She saw how he kept going despite the pain. She saw how he protected civilians even when orders told him to leave them behind. She saw the moment he looked across that choosing ceremony hall and recognized something in her eyes. She saw herself through his eyes, and she was beautiful. The connection deepened. The observers fell silent. What they were witnessing was beyond anything in their records. Daniel's memories poured out for everyone to see. Not just the pain, but the beauty. Art that humans had created. Music that made souls soar. Love between strangers who had no reason to help each other but did anyway. Sacrifice and courage and hope, repeated across 10,000 years of human history. This was humanity, not perfect, not peaceful, but endlessly capable of growth, of change, of reaching beyond themselves for something greater. And at the center of it all was Daniel's choice in that ceremony hall. The observers saw his thinking clearly for the first time. He had not chosen to make a point or to be different. He had chosen her because he saw her truth, because he recognized a kindred spirit, because he knew what it felt like to be underestimated. The connection reached its peak. Daniel and stood at the center of the light, their hands clasped, tears streaming down both their faces. The high priest watched with his mouth open. In 100 years of performing this ritual, he had never seen anything like this. The bond forming between these two was not weak or unstable. It was one of the strongest he had ever witnessed. Finally, the light began to fade. The humming quieted. The connection settled into something permanent. Daniel and opened their eyes at the same moment. They looked at each other with perfect understanding. They knew each other completely now. Every fear, every hope, every secret. And they loved each other anyway. The high priest stepped forward on shaking legs. "The bond is complete," he announced, his voice cracked with emotion. "In all my years, I have never seen a bonding so strong. These two souls are truly one." The observers across the empire did not know how to react. They had expected the human to fail. They had expected chaos and incompatibility. Instead, they had witnessed something beautiful. Emperor rose from his seat in the viewing chamber. His eyes were wet. He had seen his daughter's entire life through that connection. He had seen every time she cried alone, every time she needed him and he was not there. He walked into the temple chamber. The crowd parted before him. He approached and Daniel, who still stood together on the platform. Then the emperor of the did something he had never done before. He bowed to his youngest daughter. "Forgive me," he said. "I was blind, you were never cursed, you were always a treasure, I was simply too foolish to see it." Let go of Daniel's hand and embraced her father. For the first time in her life, he held her back. Across the empire, watching on their screens, millions have felt their understanding shift. The silver princess they had mocked was not broken. She was remarkable, and the human who had chosen her was not a fool. He had seen what none of them had bothered to look for. And now they had all seen it too. Daniel stood quietly and watched reconcile with her father. He was exhausted from the bonding. His mind still echoed with shared memories, but he felt at peace. He had opened himself completely and been accepted completely. He had shown the truth of humanity. And for the first time they understood. 1 year had passed since the bonding ritual. The galaxy had changed in ways no one had predicted. Daniel Cole and Princess had become celebrities across dozens of worlds. Their story spread from planet to planet, told and retold until it became legend. The soldier who chose the forgotten princess. The bonding that showed two species their own souls. The love that grew from respect and understanding instead of politics and power. Had been appointed as the primary ambassador to the United Earth Alliance. It was a role she was born for, even if no one had recognized it before. She understood humans now, not just from study, but from the bond she shared with Daniel. She could feel echoes of his thoughts and emotions, just as he could feel hers. This connection made her the perfect bridge between species. Daniel served as her consort and protector. He attended diplomatic meetings and state functions. He stood beside her when she addressed crowds. Some nobles still looked at him with disapproval, but their numbers grew smaller every year. Most now looked at him with respect, or at least curiosity. "You know," said one morning, "I used to hate being stared at. Now I barely notice." They were eating breakfast in their quarters on the. Daniel smiled at her over his cup of tea. "You used to hide from attention. Now you command it." "I had a good teacher," reached across the table and touched his hand. Through their bond, he felt her affection like a warm glow. "You showed me that being different is not the same as being wrong. You figured that out yourself. I just gave you a chance." The alliance between humans and had grown stronger than anyone had imagined. Trade flourished between the two empires. Cultural exchanges brought artists, scientists, and teachers to both. Human music played in concert halls. Art hung in human museums. Children on both worlds grew up learning about each other. There were problems, of course. There were always problems when different peoples came together. Misunderstandings happened. Conflicts arose, but the foundation of the alliance was solid. It was built on genuine connection, not just political convenience. Ambassador Hayes visited often. She had become a friend to both Daniel and. One evening, she sat with them in the palace garden and shook her head in wonder. "You know," said, "when you walked past those golden princesses and chose, I thought my career was over. I thought you had destroyed everything I had worked for." "And now," Daniel asked. "Now I realize you built something better than I ever could have," raised her glass, "to unconventional choices." They drank together under the light of the twin moons. Not everyone had benefited from the changes. Princess had watched her youngest sister rise while she herself fell into irrelevance. The investigation into the assassination attempt had continued quietly for months. New evidence emerged. Witnesses came forward. The trail of conspiracy finally reached all the way to Sdor. Emperor confronted his eldest daughter in private. The conversation was short and painful. Everything at first, but the evidence was overwhelming. Her own messages showed she had known about the plot. Her own allies had confessed to meeting with her before the attack. The emperor gave her a choice: public trial and certain conviction, or quiet exile to a distant moon. Chose exile. She left the without ceremony, stripped of her titles and her inheritance. Some said she was planning revenge. Some said she had abandoned all ambition. Daniel did not know which was true, and he did not care. Was no longer a threat to. That was all that mattered. The real shock came 6 months later. Emperor announced that he was nearing the end of his reign. It was time to name his successor. The empire expected him to choose the warrior princess or the artist. They were next in line. They were golden and beautiful and everything a ruler was supposed to be. The emperor chose. The announcement shook the empire. A silver-scaled princess as heir. A princess who had been mocked and ignored for her entire life. It was unthinkable. But Emperor explained his reasoning in an address that was broadcast to every corner of the empire. "I have ruled for many years," he said. "I have made many mistakes. The greatest of them was teaching my people to value appearance over substance. I looked at my youngest daughter and saw only her silver scales. I did not see her intelligence, her compassion, her strength. A human stranger had to show me what I had missed." He looked directly into the camera. "The next ruler of our empire must see clearly. She must look beyond the surface. She must find value where others see none. Is that ruler? She always was. I was simply too blind to recognize it." The reaction was mixed. Some celebrated, others protested. But slowly, steadily, the tide turned. People remembered the bonding ritual. They remembered seeing life through the connection. They remembered her lonely childhood and her quiet strength and her willingness to forgive a father who had failed her. Maybe different was not wrong after all. Maybe silver could shine as bright as gold. The ceremony was held 1 year after the announcement. Stood before a crowd of millions, wearing a crown that had been specially made for her. It was not gold. It was silver like her scales, and it caught the light of the twin suns like captured. Daniel stood beside her, wearing the formal robes of a royal consort. He looked out at the sea of faces and felt emotions through their bond. She was nervous. She was proud. She was determined. "My people," said. Her voice carried across the plaza and was broadcast to every world in the empire. "I stand before you today not because I am better than anyone else. I stand here because someone believed in me when no one else did, because I was given a chance to prove my worth." She paused. The crowd was silent. "For too long, we have judged others by their surfaces, by their scales, their strength, their beauty. We have ignored those who were different. We have thrown away treasures because they did not look like what we expected." Raised her head high. "That ends today. Under my rule, every citizen of this empire will be seen for who they truly are. No one will be cast aside for being different. No one will be told they are worthless because they do not fit our narrow ideas of value." She turned and looked at Daniel. Through their bond, he felt her love like sunlight. "A human taught me this lesson," she said. "He looked at a room full of golden princesses and saw something in me that no one else had bothered to look for. He saw a person worth knowing, worth protecting, worth loving." She turned back to the crowd. "Let us learn from humanity. Let us look deeper. Let us build a future where every being can be seen and valued and loved for who they truly are." The crowd erupted into cheers. The sound rolled across the plaza like thunder. Daniel watched raise her hand to acknowledge them, and his heart swelled with pride. He had not chosen the least popular princess to make a statement. He had simply seen what was there all along. And now the whole galaxy could see it too. That evening, after the ceremonies were over and the crowds had gone home, Daniel and stood alone on a balcony overlooking the city. The twin moons hung low in the sky, casting silver light across everything. "Are you happy?" Daniel asked. Leaned against him. Through their bond, he felt her answer before she spoke it. "I never imagined this life," she said. "I never thought I would be here. But yes, Daniel, I am happy. You made me believe I could be." Daniel put his arm around her. "You did the hard part. All I did was notice." "That was everything." Looked up at him. "You noticed when no one else would. That changed my world." They stood together in the moonlight, looking out at the city below. Somewhere out there, humans were learning from each other, growing together, building something new. It had started with a single choice. A soldier who looked past gold and saw silver. A man who valued truth over appearance. Daniel Cole had astonished an empire, not with weapons or strength, but with something far more powerful. He had looked at someone the world had rejected and seen a treasure worth fighting for. And that had changed everything.